Rome votes for a new mayor. The candidate leading opinion polls is young, anti-establishment and female. Her election would be a first for the Italian capital. Belgian authorities charge 3 men with terrorism offences following a series of raids on Friday night. And a church service starts in memory of British MP Jo Cox, who was killed on Thursday. EU referendum campaigns have begun again after a 3-day suspension. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. I'm Belle Lupton. Now we begin in Italy, where polls have opened across the country and in the capital for the second round of mayoral elections. And it looks likely that Rome will elect its first female mayor. Virginia Raggi is from the populist Five Star Movement. Her success in the capital will be a worry for Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, whose centre-left coalition has been losing popularity. Well, for more on this, let's bring in our correspondent Philip Willen, who's in Rome. And Philip, Raggi is very much the star of this mayoral race. All eyes are on her. She's really captured the public imagination, hasn't she?
Yes, that's right. She's a very photogenic young woman. And the fact that she would be the first ever female mayor of Rome also books her a place in the history books if she wins today. It seems that she's convincing Roman voters that she's one of them, and that her programme of honesty and simple, practical reforms will improve the quality of their lives, while the traditional parties, both on the left and the right, are deeply tainted by Rome's corruption scandals, which have taken many forms and have unquestionably spoiled the quality of life for Roman citizens. Certainly, if she is elected, it will be a huge challenge for her to deal with the city's problems as an inexperienced politician, possibly with a number of naive and idealistic solutions.
And Philip, why does this vote matter outside of Rome? What are the implications at a national level?
Well, the vote has very important implications for national politics. Matteo Renzi is the man, by way of reforming the country and modernising it, a man in a hurry. But if the Five Star Movement that Raggi represents can stake a claim to be a more convincing and effective reformist force and untainted by the corruption of the past, that will be a worrying development for him. And in Milan, there's a very tight race between Mr. Renzi's candidate and a very likeable, personable candidate representing the united centre-right. And basically these two races in Rome and Milan represent the future of Italian politics. Is it going to be a battle between Renzi's Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement, as in Rome, or will the centre-right get its act together and formulate the usual challenge, the usual battle between left and right? So this could give us an indication of the shape of Italian politics in years to come.
Philip Willen, our correspondent in Rome, thank you very much for that update there. Now, Iran's civil aviation organisation says it's reached a deal with US aircraft maker Boeing to buy 100 planes. The agreement now needs to be approved by the US Treasury. If that approval is granted, it'll be the first time Iran has bought from Boeing since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, and another sign of easing US sanctions on Iran after a nuclear deal was signed last year. Belgian authorities have charged 3 men with terrorism offences following a series of raids on Friday night. In all, 12 were arrested. 9 of those have now been released. The 3 in custody have been identified. Among their charges, attempting to commit murder. Our Belgium correspondent Maeve McMahon has been following the investigation from Brussels.
We know that they were plotting something for this very weekend because according to the federal prosecutor's statement on Friday that was released after, or on Saturday morning, that was released after those 40 raids and searches, they needed to intervene in an immediate manner because according to their investigation, something was being plotted. And we understand that a possible terrorist attack was being planned to be carried out yesterday during the Belgium-Irish match at 3 o'clock in Rogier. So that's downtown in the centre of the city where fans were planning to gather. We understand the authorities caught hold of this information because they managed to listen into telephone conversations that these men were having in the last few days, and that's why they decided to intervene. Now, whether or not we know whether they're linked to the El Bakraoui brothers and to Nassim Lashraoui, the three men that blew themselves up here on the 22nd of March, is yet to be confirmed by the federal prosecutor. However, Belgian media are reporting that they are definitely in this circle of acquaintance, that they're linked to these men, and that in those telephone conversations, police also heard these men mentioned. But as I said, that's yet to be confirmed by the federal prosecutor. What we can confirm, however, is on Friday night, another arrest was made. An eighth man was taken in for his direct links to the Paris attacks. His name is Youssef Ia, and he, according to Belgian media, is a childhood friend of Khalid al-Bakraoui, and seemingly he frequented an apartment in Etterbeek a number of times, an apartment where Osama Krayem, a Swedish national, and Khalid al-Bakraoui left on that morning of the 22nd of March. Khalid al-Bakraoui killed himself up, killing a number of people at Malbec Metro, but Osama Krayem now is behind bars, but with the Belgian authorities. He was just playing a role. He didn't blow himself up that morning, but he was the man who bought the backpack, for example, that was used for those attacks.
Our correspondent in Brussels, Maeve McMahon, speaking there. Now, a French anti-terror court has charged two men suspected of having links to Larossi Abala, the man who murdered a police couple at their home just 50 kilometres west of us here in Paris on Monday night. Abala was killed when police intervened shortly after the murders. Before stabbing the couple, he had pledged allegiance to the Islamic State group. Roudaba Abbas has more.
Prosecutors in France have detained two men for links with Larossi Abala, who killed a police officer and his partner on Monday. A judicial investigation is also underway to establish if Saad Radraji and Sharaf Dina Labarouz were complicit in the murders. Abala was shot in a police standoff on Monday after fatally stabbing police commander Jean-Baptiste Salvin and his partner Jessica Schneider in front of their 3-year-old son. He committed the crime just a few weeks after pledging allegiance to the Islamic State group. All three men were known to authorities for their terrorist convictions in 2013, involving the recruitment of jihadi fighters to Pakistan. On Saturday, more than 1,000 people gathered at a memorial service to pay tribute to the murdered couple.
We're united against these cowardly assassins and support our law enforcement officers, as well as their family and their little boy, who will be traumatized for the rest of his life.
As you see, everyone is here, and we have all been hit. Whether you're Moroccan, Turkish, Algerian, we have all been affected, and everyone is angry. Islam never asked for this. Those people are not like us.
President François Hollande has responded to the killings by pledging to mobilize considerable force against the terrorist threat faced by the country.
A church service has started in the Yorkshire British village of Birstall to remember the British MP who was killed there on Thursday. The vicar leading the service described Jo Cox as a fervent advocate for the poor and oppressed. Cox's family arrived in her constituency over the weekend to join with several hundred people in paying tribute to her, as Catherine Clifford reports.
It was just steps away from here that Jo Cox was shot and stabbed to death in her home constituency. Now her family add their flowers to the pile. Hundreds turned out to show their support as Cox's younger sister Kim spoke for the family.
There are some things in life you should never have to do. Last night I had to go and identify my sister's body.
The family thanked Bernard Kenny, the man who was injured trying to help the Labour MP. A former aid worker, Cox was an advocate for refugee rights and immigration. She used her maiden speech in the House of Commons to talk about what ethnic diversity brought to her local community. Her sister quoted words from that speech in her tribute.
We have to continue this strength and solidarity in the days, months and years to come, as part of Jo's legacy. And to focus on, as Jo would say, that which unites us and not which divides us.
The family said Cox's husband Brendan was looking after their 5- and 3-year-old children at home.
For now, our family is broken, but we will mend over time, and we will never let Jo leave our lives. She will live on through all the good people in the world, through Brendan, through us, and through her truly wonderful children, who will always know what an utterly amazing woman their mother was. She was a human being, and she was perfect.
In the face of unthinkable violence, a strong, composed and positive message from Jo Cox's family in her memory.
And campaigning in Britain's EU referendum has begun again after a 3-day suspension following Jo Cox's murder. The Vote Leave campaign is back out in London. Boris Johnson, leader of that campaign there, coming out in favour, of course, of voting out of the EU. These are live pictures that you're seeing now in London of that campaign. The latest polls show a roughly even split between in and out voters, as Delano de Souza explains now.
After a 3-day suspension, a final push ahead of Thursday's referendum. Both sides are trying to give their campaigns a new lease of life after the shock murder of British MP Jo Cox. London's former mayor and the most prominent pro-Brexit face told the Sun newspaper on Sunday that this week the British people will have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Prime Minister too renewed his appeal, calling for the country to remain part of the European Union. Penning an opinion piece in the influential Sunday Times, David Cameron wrote the UK faces an existential choice on Thursday. 2 recent opinion polls showed the Remain camp had been given some renewed momentum, while another survey indicated the vote is still too close to call. Analysts say the bounce in support for the Remain side is based on concerns of the economic impact of a Brexit. But there's no denying the death of Jo Cox has had an effect. The language on both sides has become less inflammatory in the wake of the attack.
Time now for a look at some other stories we've got our eye on here at France 24. On the Japanese island of Okinawa, thousands have joined one of the biggest demonstrations in 20 years against US military bases there. The protests follow the arrest of an American suspected of murdering a local woman. The rally marks a new low for US and Japan in their relations with the island. 31 people are now known to have died after flash floods caused landslides in Indonesia. Search crews are still looking for 19 people who remain missing in central Java. Thousands of homes have been destroyed and drivers swept off roads in their cars. And Turkey's president says he will go ahead and build a monument in Istanbul's Gezi Park, despite the mass protests against that development in 2013. Those demonstrations became the biggest threat to Recep Tayyip Erdogan's leadership. The president plans to uproot trees to make way for a replica of Ottoman-era military barracks. One for the daredevils among you now. I hope you've got a head for heights, because we're going to Denmark, where the second round of the Cliff Diving World Series has taken place. The winner, British man Gary Hunt, who, with other competitors, dived from the roof of the Copenhagen Opera House, a vertiginous 27-metre fall. The third round out of 9 different rounds will be held in Portugal next month. You've really got to have a head for heights to look at that. Well, that's it for this update. I'll be back at the top of the hour with all the latest. Do join me then.